Today, you'll learn some graphic design principles that will improve your invitation flow. This is a direct snippet from our course on invitation composition and layout that you can find linked below the video. Also, you can join us over in the Stationery Squad community on Facebook. It is a free resource group for wedding invitation designers that is also linked below. So today we're going to talk about invitation composition and layout, and we're going to get into a few technical graphic design terms. So if you're self-taught like me, this will be some new territory for you. And if you're not self-taught and you did go to design school, we'll be taking those terms that you already know and applying them to invitation specifically. There's not really any classes out there that teach you how to apply those graphic design principles to wedding invitations specifically, so that's what we're going to do today. You can check out all of our courses and resources for stationery designers at designbylaney.com, but I also encourage you to sign up for Stationery School, which is our monthly subscription service. You'll get 2 courses just like this every single month, and strategic discussions, tutorials, and motivation straight to your inbox every single week, all for $35 a month. So for pretty much the price of this course, you can get an extra course and all these awesome tutorials and motivations directly to your inbox. So definitely check out Stationery School at designbylaney.com. So let's get started. The first principle of design that we are going to talk about is patterns. On your screen here, we've got 2 patterns. They are known as an F pattern on the left and a Z pattern on the right. This is what the technology of eye scanners has realized that the majority of people do with their eyes when they are looking at a page. If it has a lot of text specifically, they're going to go with this F pattern, which means they're going to read straight across, drop down a little bit, straight across, drop down a little bit, straight across, all from left to right. And then after they get a few of these bars, they're actually going to start kind of skimming down the left side of the page, which will create the bottom of the F, and these little across bars will get a little bit shorter. The Z pattern is different, and it's more for things that are landing pages, call to actions, where you have a direct course of action you're taking very quickly. So what designers typically do here is take your eye straight across the top to some big feature over here, and then they'll bring you down to the next big feature over here and keep going. I like this method when it comes more to like reply cards or details cards, where you can put unique elements over on different sides of the page and then maybe bring the next one. Like if you have reply up here with your reply by date and then your name section over here, that's a really nice way for your eye to go. However, for invitations, which have a little bit more text usually, we typically follow, in general, a version of this F frame. So keep that in mind when you are composing and laying out your pieces. You don't really want to have anything that starts over here, starts at the bottom. I'll show you a good example of this in the future, and you'll see how it looks really awkward to your eye. The second thing we're going to talk about is hierarchies of design, and there's a lot of different ways to do this on a wedding invitation, but the basic principle is that the most important pieces should be the first things that your eye's drawn to. So you'll see here that your eye really is drawn to this crest at the top, but then from there, if you got rid of all this other little tiny text, these are the 3 elements that you're kind of drawn to first. And things like the bride and groom's name have the same weight, whereas this one is higher than all the other text, but still a little bit lower in hierarchy than these 2 elements at the top. And that is on purpose because these are really important pieces of the design. So of course the names are always going to be first when it comes to a wedding invitation. If you want people to pay attention to anything, it's typically the names. If your client has something else in mind, that's completely fine, but for the most part, you're going to start with highlighting the names. And we've used a lot of different things here to make this happen. So you'll see color. We made the names a different color than the background text and a more noticeable color at that. We've also made it a larger text, and we've made it a different text, a script text that's just automatically going to draw your eye a little bit sooner. As a side note, this is my font that I created called Sapphire Script if you want to take a look at it. We've done some of the same things here with the venue name, but we've made it smaller so that it is secondary to these elements. Of course, this crest at the top is still going to be a very prominent element, and if you're doing a web page or a book or something where the text is the most important part, you wouldn't want to put a distracting element at the top like this. But in theory, this crest is going to be used throughout their wedding. It is going to be a really important element for their day. So this is where you get into kind of the difference between traditional graphic design and wedding invitations. Traditional graphic design has a lot of functional principles as well as aesthetic principles, but in invitation design, we can actually lean a little bit more on aesthetics. And not to say that this crest isn't functional, it gives a very clear indication of what this wedding is going to look like. You might have gardening, you might see these colors and these flowers. This crest definitely looks a little bit preppy and southern to me. And so these are all functional pieces that this crest is still telling you, even while being just kind of an aesthetic element at first glance. So just as a reminder of that kind of F shape of where your eye is going to go, you're going to see this crest, you're going to go down, you're going to read these larger pieces of text, and then you're going to read this. Most people aren't even going to necessarily read like together with their families. They invite you to celebrate their wedding because they know it's a wedding invitation from first looking at it. And we'll kind of talk about the different ways that you can tell that just by using these common layouts that I'm going to show you. The third principle we're going to talk about is white space, and I think this is a great example of it here. We have a simple wedding invitation, but we have two different versions of this little frame element that we have on each corner. And you can see we actually get pretty different vibes just by allowing this white space or not. So what happens here on the left is you basically get this white kind of box frame that's imaginary, but you still see it. Even though it's not technically there, you still kind of see this white box around the entire piece. So you get kind of a double frame. You get this corner frame as well as a white box on the outside. Whereas with this one on the right, you don't get that white box on the outside, and you kind of get an imaginary frame that connects these two, but only in the opposite corners. So you only get one framing effect. And then the bleed on these corners makes it seem like these flowers are so much bigger when in fact they're not that much bigger. And like they go on forever off the corners of the invitation. That's really what a bleed does, is kind of make you feel like the design goes on forever in any direction, especially when you've got this like very clear top to bottom, left to right diagonal image. You just feel like these flowers start way up here and these just keep going forever because your eye is drawn immediately down this diagonal. You'll often see designers that really want to leave a lot of white space, and I'll show you some examples of invitations that do have a lot of white space. This layout in general has room for a lot of white space because it's very simple. I'm personally not always a fan of white space. I think it just depends on who your client is and what the general style you're going for is. So I do like to make sure I take into account the white space and play with it a little bit. So I always try to design invitations a couple different ways like this so that I can decide which ones are really working for me. And the white space sometimes creates these shapes that you don't necessarily intend. So like that extra box here or those little L shapes that we're getting here, you didn't really do that. You didn't do anything actively to make that happen, but your eye is still kind of seeing that and paying attention to the gaps between these two leaves or the gaps on the edges of this one on the left. If you liked the skills learned in this video, make sure you join our monthly membership, Stationery School, to get 2 20-minute courses and more every single month. If you're not quite there yet, I also run a private stationery community on Facebook that's free to join. Find the Stationery Squad link in the description of this video.